Hey folks, welcome to Thinking Theology. I'm Don. I'm looking at Christopher Hitchens again, and he was an avowed atheist. He passed away some years ago. I don't know, it was like 15 years, 10 years ago or so. And I'm taking a look at his video here, The True Core of the Jesus Myth. That's what somebody titled it. I don't know if he did, but I'm going to find out what he's got to say. I don't know how far into it. It's 7.5 minutes, which ordinarily isn't that long, but depends on how many interjections I make and my thoughts. I just look at whether or not arguments are reasonable to me from someone else's perspective. Is the argument reasonable, or are they making claims that are overreaching? Like, to me, the statement, there is no God, is an overreach. The statement, I believe there is no God, is not. That's perfectly legitimate. The statement, there is a God, that to me is an overreach. I believe there is a God. I believe his name is Yahweh. I believe these things. Those are fair enough statements. That can't be gainsaid, really. So I'm going to see what he says and how he develops them. I don't care if somebody believes in God or doesn't. That doesn't bother me. But my thing is, are they kind of nice, or at least not a jackass or a douchebag about things? That's my whole thing. Like, if somebody, you could be an atheist. I don't care your politics. I don't care your religion, lack thereof, or anything. If you're kind of nice, or you can laugh at yourself, you can just sort of have some fun, I'm cool with that. That's just kind of been my MO, and still is. So let's.
In saying that in my book I say that there's no reason at all to believe that the so-called Jesus of Nazareth ever existed, but here's what I say about Socrates.
There actually is.
The original collision between our reasoning faculties and any form of organized faith, this is my book, though it must have occurred before in the minds of many, is probably exemplified in the trial of Socrates in 399 BC. It does not matter at all to me that we have no absolute certainty that Socrates even existed. The records of his life and his words are secondhand, almost but not quite as much as are the books of the Jewish and Christian Bible and the hadiths of Islam. Philosophy, however, has no need of such demonstrations because it does not deal in revealed wisdom. Now, as it happens, we do have some very good descriptions of the life of Socrates that make his existence to me plausible, but it doesn't matter to me at all whether he was real or not. What matters is that someone advanced his method of reasoning, his testing of evidence against experience, his commitment to a certain kind of dialectical honesty.
Yeah, what they refer to that as the Socratic method, by asking a lot of questions, which can be upsetting to people because then they have to think. But one of my philosophy professors back at Rutgers, Professor Henson, just made a comment in class. I forget, it might have been an ethics class. I don't think it was logic. He had very nice nature, this professor. Most of mine did, in fact. But he said Socrates and Jesus had at least one thing in common. They both had a lot to say, but neither of them published. And you're like, you know what? It's true. Other people wrote on their behalf. And there are some problems with that. But, all right, let's see where he goes with this. There is just as much evidence, if you will, for Jesus' existence as Socrates' existence as well. The early texts, the people having written about them, it isn't just a matter that there's something written about them in the New Testament. You could go back to, Erasmus and Eusebius and early church, quote-unquote, fathers and people. There's quite a bit of evidence that Jesus existed as a man. The question always becomes, for people, was he the Son of God? Did he raise from the dead? And all the other stories that pose issues for people.
And that if it hadn't been him, it would have been someone else. So that's what's precious to me. And that he never said, you've got to believe in everything I say, or go to hell or heaven. And here's why you've got to agree with me. Because my mother never went to bed with anybody. And that proves the truth of what I say. Or by the way, I must have looked very dead when they took me down from the cross, but I didn't die. And that proves my point. I'm willing to grant it all. I'm willing to grant the Immaculate Conception first, then the virgin birth, then the resurrection, and the Annunciation and the Assumption. I'm willing to grant all of it. It doesn't prove the truth of the proposition that you should take no thought for the morrow.
All right, he's jumping around a bit here. And though in some aspects, I do not disagree with what he's saying, but he is jumping around in streams of thought but I'm sure he'll bring it back. The have no thought for the morrow thing. I mean, that's always been a problem for me too, because we do have to think about tomorrow. But that verse is in a specific context. But anyway, let's see where he goes with it.
The central doctrine of Jesus of Nazareth: take no thought for the morrow. No investment, no thrift, no care for your children, that you should abandon your family, not worry about construction, about investment, about anything. Just follow me. A ridiculous and immoral proposition.
I wouldn't say that per se, because here's the thing. You've got to think of the context. The Roman occupation. They did not like the Roman occupation. They didn't like Rome. If you were occupied by a quote-unquote foreign army, you would not like it as well. And so if you look at this as a military exercise, and he had his fishermen and other gentlemen who were pretty tough guys, leave your family, let your wives care for them, come with me, we'll see what we could pull off here. Then in that context, I could see, yeah, what Jesus was saying is, we're fairly extreme, and we want to make something good happen for the benefit of everybody. But let's see how Hitchens goes further with this.
That, as C.S. Lewis so cleverly, and I must say for him, very honestly puts it, means that the man must either have been a maniac, a sick man, an evil man, or he must have believed that the world was coming immediately to an end, and that he was commanded to announce this fact to the deluded Bronze Age inhabitants of Palestine. Because if he didn't believe that, and if he didn't believe he was divinely mandated, then his words would not have been inaccurate or false. They would have been wicked. That's what you have to be talking about. Now, there is, on the historicity point, there are only two reasons, I think, to suppose that there may have been the figure of some kind of deluded rabbi present at that time. The first is the fakery of the story. The fakery itself proves something. The prophecy says this man must be born in the house of David, of David's line in David's town. It means he must be born in Bethlehem. Jesus of Nazareth is well known to have been born in Nazareth. In order to get him to Bethlehem, a huge fabrication has to be undertaken. A census is proposed by Caesar Augustus. No such census ever took place. The people of the region were not required to go back to their hometown to be registered.
True.
That's never happened. Quirinius was not governor of Syria.
Yeah, I mean, that is true. There isn't an evidence of such a worldwide, even when the people were required to come in to give their names in order to be taxed. There's not a record of that.
In that year, as the Gospels say. None of the story of the Nativity is true in any detail, and not one of the Gospels agrees with each other on this fabrication. But the fabrication itself suggests something. If they were simply going to make up the whole thing, and there'd never been any such person, then why not just have him born in Bethlehem right there and leave out the Nazarene business? So the very falsity of it, the very fanatical attempt to make it come right, suggests that, yes, there may have been a charismatic, deluded individual wandering around at that time. But which is most impressive to you? The fantastic fabrications, the unbelievably inane and inarticulate preachments, or the inconsistencies in the story?
All right, I'll stop there. I mean, I can understand from his standpoint the issues that he's got, but there are other issues as well, and this isn't to convince anybody. I speak from my reference point just as he does of his. Part of the problem that people have is the assumption that the Bible is the written word of God, which I used to believe several decades ago. But then when I rewrote the New Testament in my own words, I saw that it actually undermined my own faith in that precept. Because the notion that God had people write what he wanted them to write, which is why it's consistent and you can trust it. It fits like a hand in a glove. Any errors in it are due to human translations and some forgeries and such. But, 1 John 5:7, Trinitarian dogma and all that. But when it's proposed that this is the word of God, that God had people write things that he wanted them to write, and therefore it is flawless, well, that you run into problems of which Hitchens spoke. A lot of parts of it don't fit. I mean, he alluded to the Gospels, and the four Gospels don't. The accounts differ, and it is true. I mean, I discovered that, and different versions of the Bible differ greatly from one another. Sometimes they say the exact opposite. of one another. It took a year and a half for me to rewrite the New Testament in my own words. And then I rewrote it again, and I discovered that this is really mankind's account of salvation, of God, of ethics, of morals, of justice, and of course, Jesus of Nazareth. When Paul came along, Paul promoted or promulgated the story of Jesus. He was the first one. Paul's writings preceded the Gospels by a significant number of years. But storytelling back then wasn't as much about getting things right as much as they were about speaking to accomplish something. And in that time, you had your Greek gods, you had your Roman gods, and then it was spoken of men, gods came down and became like men, and it was a very different language, a very different time. That would produce some difficulties through the lens of our eyes today, the way we're going to read these texts. If we look at this as the Word of God, it's been preserved forever and ever because God's going to see to it because God is in control. And these texts are just right for all ages and such, and the truth will always be there. Then you're made to make things fit. A lot of the pressure is taken off that when you say, okay, this was mankind's best attempt to make sense of what was going on at the time. And then that brings in other difficulties as well. And Hitchens is kind of on them, but he's mixing those two ideas, those two paradigms, that the Bible's the Word of God, perfect, flawless. Now, he doesn't believe that, but he's working off of that assumption and saying that these discrepancies in here produce nothing. And this is only part of what he's saying here. I don't have difficulty with, this is his belief. This was the research he did. He was a very learned man. He may be right, he may not be. One of the unfortunate parts, whether you believe in God or not, whether you have a particular faith or not, is that we have to die to find out. And that is a pretty crappy part of the package, I gotta say. Yes, some of the language he used, maybe he got sick of people coming at him so hard, so he's using words like this deluded individual and such. I wouldn't use that incendiary language because I like to get along with people a bit better, but c'est la vie, such is life. All right, folks, leave your comments and we'll go from there. Subscribe if you haven't. That would be a fun thing to do too. Have a great day. I'll see you on another video. Try to be kind to everybody as much as is in you. Have a great day, folks.